to attend. We knew today would draw a great deal of attention and thought it best he remain at home. Lord Black. Another reporter grabbed his attention. Any comment on the miscarriage of justice that saw you incarcerated in Azkaban? I am disappointed that the ministry I worked for failed to provide me with my basic legal and human rights, Sirius said, recalling the prepared statements Brian and Remus had made him learn, but I am grateful to the current administration for correcting the injustice, particularly the efforts of the minister and Director Bones. Cornelius puffed up beside him. Your political agenda seems to contradict the reputation of the House of Black. What do you say to that? Another reporter yelled. That I am my own man, as my family discovered when I was the first Black sorted to Gryffindor. Sirius answered. Do you deny your actions led to the death of the Lestranges? Someone else shouted. Sirius pinned the seedy-looking journalist with a hard stare that silenced the crowd. The Lestranges tortured two very wonderful people, who were also my friends, into insanity. They as good as murdered them and certainly deprived a child of his parents as though they had. The Lestranges brought dishonor to the House of Black and were stripped of their magic. I have no regrets. He held up a hand. One more question. How do you feel about taking over Harry's guardianship? Rita got in before her rivals could. Sirius smiled genuinely. I'm honored to finally be allowed to do the job that his parents tasked me to do as Harry's godfather. Nothing is more important to me than Harry. I will do everything in my power to protect him and ensure he has a happy life. He held up a hand. If you'll excuse me, I must leave you in the very capable hands of the minister. Thank you. He headed for an open flue and wasn't surprised when he saw Dumbledore waiting. It was past time for them to talk. Chapter warning of mention of abuse. Oh. The atmosphere was thick enough to cut with a knife. Albus glanced around the comfortable study with wonder. He had never been to London Black Manor before. Archerus had preferred the Black Country estate, not that Albus had been there often either given their differing politics and alliances, but there had always been an invitation to the Black New Year ball before Archerus had gone into seclusion. His gaze landed finally on the young wizard sat behind his desk. Sirius surprisingly radiated a sense of belonging, rightness and authority for all that he had decried his family and heritage in the past. Albus sat on the other side, contemplating his options and what to do. There were two critical items Albus had to address with Sirius. One was to return Harry to the Dursleys as soon as possible because of the blood protection, and the other was to regain some favor with the man who now held Harry's guardianship. He wasn't foolish enough to think it was going to be easy. Evidently, Sirius had been very busy since he had flown away on the hippogriff. He had somehow broken the compulsion Albus had placed upon him for his safety, assumed the lordship and manipulated events from there to gain custody of his godson. On one level, Albus admired what he'd done. Sirius had gotten Cornelius to do his job, the ministry to award him guardianship, and he'd sent Albus on the proverbial wild Nagel chase to keep him away from England while Sirius made his first alliances and they completed the adoption. The love that had prompted Sirius into taking on the mantle of the Black family history he had literally run away from must be great and powerful indeed, Albus mused silently, and it would make Albus's task that much more difficult, all the more so for where they were. There had been a brief heated discussion on where to meet, but Sirius had gotten his way. He had bluntly told Albus that he didn't trust him not to try something, but the protections in Black Manor had enough of a reputation that he knew Albus would understand the consequences of trying something within the confines of the Black home. Albus had conceded the location as unimportant, but sat within the study. He could admit to himself that he was almost intimidated by the magic he could feel around him. A house elf had popped in and out with refreshments, and Dumbledore picked up his tea, smiling a little at the lemon biscuits that accompanied it. He needed to take the first step towards reconciliation, Albus decided, and cleared his throat. Firstly, Sirius, let me begin by apologizing to you for my part in the miscarriage of justice that you suffered. Albus began sincerely. He was truly horrified that his inaction had led to Sirius's suffering as an innocent man. The days following the defeat of Voldemort were chaotic, but I confess that when the dust settled I realized I could not remember a trial for you. I believed you guilty as you had been the secret keeper, and determined if there had not been a trial, it was not worth the pain of dragging up memories that one would cause. I let my anger and grief for James and Lily blind me to doing the right thing. I am very sorry, my boy. And your reason for sending 2 kids to save me at Hogwarts rather than providing me with the protection of the Chief Warlock?" Sirius countered. He leaned back in his chair, regarding Albus almost impassively. "Ah, well, there I have no excuse." Albus could see that he'd taken Sirius by surprise in the slight flare of his nostrils, the widening of his eyes. "Me culpa, as the Romans used to say. Once again in your regard, I did what was easy than what was right," Albus said. "Why?" asked Sirius baldly. "Several reasons," Albus prevaricated, taking a sip of his tea, "but I think you know the main one." "The compulsion charm rather gave it away," Sirius pointed out dryly. Albus winced. He had known from their discussion on where to hold their talk that Sirius was likely aware of the compulsion Albus had placed on him at Hogwarts, and he was honestly embarrassed by it. "I believed it was for the best given Cornelius's determination to have you kissed. Rather you were abroad and safe, dear boy, than close and near to Harry." Sirius interrupted. He picked up his own tea and took a large gulp as though he required fortification. "I was going to say dead," Albus corrected gently, despite Sirius being right in that ensuring distance between the two had been one of Albus's other reasons. "Harry would have been devastated if something had happened to you. Forgive me if I think your motivation wasn't quite as pure as you make it out to be. If you'd added a destination to your compulsion, no doubt I'd still be a fugitive," Sirius retorted, "and I'm not certain you've ever made a decision for Harry that took into account his happiness." His eyebrows shot up. "That every decision I have made in regards to Harry has been to keep him safe. Safe is not the same as happy," Sirius argued fiercely, and Albus conceded to himself that the other man had a point. "And I think we have very different definitions of safe." That rankled. He felt the first stirrings of annoyance. He frowned at the younger wizard. "I have to admit, Sirius," he said quietly, "that I'm surprised at the level of your animosity." He paused. "I had hoped you would extend to me the same forgiveness and chance for redemption that I showed you after your foolish dare to Severus." Sirius looked at him with disbelief. Albus was suddenly aware of the anger in Sirius's grey eyes. It was like a potion simmering in a cauldron, one wrong ingredient and the whole thing would explode. "Seriously? You're going to equate an idiotic dare made by school kid, a dare provoked by Snivellus in the first place and which was probably a set-up to get Remus killed and me expelled, something I'm sure you were aware of at the time, with failing your duty as Chief Warlock and incarcerating an innocent man for 12 years. And not only failing once but twice when you decided not to protect me at Hogwarts. And let's not forget the highly illegal compulsion charm you placed on me." Albus blushed, seeing the inequality of the comparison he'd made too late, and realizing he'd erred once again in believing Sirius hadn't known that Albus had known Severus had set up the incident in question. Sirius waved a hand to forestall Albus launching his defense. "But let's say quid pro quo that your forgiveness of my impetuous youth and decision not to expel me wipes out your part in my Azkaban torment and subsequent continuance as a fugitive even when you knew I was innocent." His tone was scathing and Albus winced again. "And it wouldn't make any difference to my level of animosity because I am not mad on my behalf so much as I am mad on Harry's." Sirius stabbed a finger in his direction. Well, at least, Albus considered wryly, they'd gotten to the heart of the matter. "There is no greater love than a parent for a child," Albus commented, his usual calm and good humor returning with the reason for Sirius's anger. "I assure you once again that I have always acted in Harry's best interests." He ignored the voice in his head pointing out that he had used the boy as bait for Voldemort in his first year because yes, that had happened, but Albus had learned from it and he hadn't used the boy since. For a long moment, he thought Sirius might hex him, but the new head of the House of Black gave an angry huff and sat back. "You know, I think you actually believe that." The reply disconcerted Albus. "You really don't see what you've done wrong, do you?" Sirius gesticulated at him. "You don't see your mistakes as mistakes but as perfectly fine decisions." Sirius was quite correct and, with the exception of the business with the stone, Albus couldn't see that he had made any major mistakes with the boy. Harry had been kept safe. But he realized that he wasn't going to get very far on the subject of Harry without addressing the mistakes Sirius believed Albus had made with Harry. "I am willing to explain my actions if it will heal this rift between us, Sirius, for Harry's sake," Albus offered eagerly. Sirius nodded slowly. Well, let's start with the first decision. Why did you decide to send Harry to his aunt's that night in 81? It was the perfect opening to explain the blood protection, Albus thought happily. Initially, the thought came from one of my last conversations with Lily, Albus admitted. She joked that if they ran out of safe places to hide, as a last resort there was always her sister's house where she had placed blood wards. She confessed that she'd known they were considered borderline illegal, but she'd lost her parents, and despite the fact that she and her sister hadn't spoken in some time, she wanted to do everything in her power to protect her. He picked up his tea and sipped it. The night of the tragedy, my monitoring spells at Godric's Hollow told me Harry was still alive. So my idea when I sent Hagrid to recover Harry was simply to hide him with his Muggle relations, providing some breathing space in the wizarding world to make sense of what had happened before long-term decisions were made. Albus explained. I thought, you see, that there had to be not one but two spies in the Order because of the information that had leaked out. I believed you were the secret keeper and had betrayed them, fulfilling one role, but I could not be certain of the second. It was imperative that Harry was placed beyond the reach of anyone in the Order. The only people I knew for certain were absolutely trustworthy at that point were Minerva, Poppy and Hagrid. I don't disagree with your reasoning yet, Sirius commented. In fact, I agreed with it at the time, bar the stuff on the spy side, because I knew it was Pettigrew. You thought there were two spies. You didn't account for your spy being an animagus who could sneak into the meetings where he was excluded. If I hadn't been thrown straight to Azkaban, or if you had visited me or ensured that I'd had a trial, you would have found that out. Albus frowned, but he couldn't deny Sirius's charge. I have admitted that was a mistake. Yes, equivalent to my school day misdemeanor daring Snape. Sirius waved a hand as Albus bristled at the intentional poke for his earlier faux pas. Let's continue. I know you changed your mind and decided to leave Harry there for the long term by the evening of the 1st of November. Why? While Hagrid brought Harry to Hogwarts, I tracked down Petunia Dursley and examined the blood wards on her home. Lily was always an impressively bright witch and they were outstanding wards. I added a few more to cover the general neighborhood. Albus recounted. Then I returned to Hogwarts and made my way to the infirmary where Harry was in the care of Poppy. Poppy had some unusual readings. He considered the best way to frame the information and decided the most straightforward would gain him points with Sirius. Harry was protected by a blood protection ward merged with his very skin. Sirius didn't react. Albus searched his expression and made an uncomfortable realization. You already knew. Harry has talked about his adventures, Sirius said quietly. That was not good. And when Remus and I theorized about how Harry had survived, Remus informed me that he had discussed such a spell with Lily. Sirius continued, shocking Albus from his rumination of how he was going to do damage control. Remus had. Albus repeated with a splutter. He set his teacup down with a shaking hand. Does he know the exact spell? Which reference book she used? Yes, as it happens. Sirius said. I'm sure he would have told you had you informed him about the blood protection back then. Another dig, and Albus couldn't help but wince at the knowledge that he had missed out on such vital information because he had suspected Remus of being the other spy and hadn't confided in him. Of course, in hindsight it was easy to see that Lily might have discussed the spell with someone, and the obvious person in that circle would have been Remus given his leaning toward academia. But back to you, Sirius said. You found the blood protection ward and... He gestured for Albus to continue. And came to the conclusion that Lily had obviously meant for Harry to reside with her sister. The blood ward around Harry and around the house provide him with an unparalleled level of protection. While he can call Privet Drive home, his blood maintains the ward around the house and imbues it with the same lethal nature of the ward around his skin. Voldemort cannot touch him there. But in addition to that, the presence of someone with his mother's blood within the house ward anchors the one around his skin. Albus said eagerly. Surely now Sirius would see the need for Harry to return there. But there was no look of horror at having taken Harry away from such protection or dismay at possibly losing the protection that Harry carried. Albus frowned. If you have talked with Harry about his adventures, then you surely realize the blood protection has saved his life twice, once that night when Voldemort attacked, and once when Harry confronted his spirit when it possessed Quirrell. I do realize it, Headmaster, and you've confirmed the why of it pretty much for the reasons I and Remus suspected. I'm not sure how you jumped from Lily saying her sister was a last resort and she hadn't spoken to her in years, to believing she meant for Harry to go there, Sirius said. And we'll come back to the protection no doubt in good time, but right now I'd rather discuss why you left Harry with the Dursleys without any oversight, since Minerva warned you that they were the worst kind of muggles. It was an insightful question. Albus sighed. I didn't leave him without any oversight. Arabella Figg was soon stationed in the neighborhood to keep watch once I was certain that she was not the spy. But I believed when Petunia took him in that she had put aside her differences with Lily and committed herself to looking after him regardless of the issues between she and Lily. Firstly, I know stationing anybody was Remus's idea, Sirius commented, and secondly, did Figg ever enter the Dursley residence? Did she check out his bedroom? Investigate his living conditions? Were the Dursleys aware that they were being watched? I had promised Petunia minimal contact and I did not see the need to inform her. Albus said defensively. Arabella, it is true, was never able to get inside the house, but she babysat for Harry, albeit on an occasional basis in her own home. And she never reported any concerns about how the Dursleys treated him. Sirius probed. It was clear the issue Sirius was highlighting, and Albus thought it best to tackle it head-on. She expressed a concern that the Dursleys might not love Harry as they did their own child following her first babysitting experience, but she assured me he was fed and clothed. She never raised the matter again, and I believed Harry was doing well from the odd photo she sent. Albus sighed. I realize such an unloving environment isn't ideal, but he arrived at Hogwarts a normal child, eager to learn magic, and I believe the Dursleys, for all their faults, have raised an admirable boy. Sirius shook his head. Unbelievable. He held up a hand before Albus could continue to defend the Dursleys and his hands-off position. He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a sheaf of bound parchment. He tossed it on the desk in front of Albus. That is a report about Harry's home environment compiled by Amelia Bones and Alastair Moody from the visit they made to Harry to interview him about the incident involving me at Hogwarts. Albus frowned as he warily took in the parchment. It's the reason why I was given immediate custody of Harry. Sirius continued in the same hard, unrelenting tone. They didn't deem his home environment unloving, Headmaster, they deemed it abusive. He gestured at the report. I haven't read it because I prefer to have Harry confide in me of his own accord, but from what little he has confided in me, I have to say I agree with the conclusions of the report. He glared at Albus. He slept in a cupboard under the stairs until they received his first Hogwarts letter, which was addressed there. The information stunned Albus. Surely Petunia wouldn't have done that to a child. Surely there had been some mistake. He received nothing but second-hand clothes and practically no birthday or Christmas presents. If he received something, it was a mocking item to instill in him he wasn't worthy of actual presents. Sirius continued. I know from what Remus found out that Harry was locked up in his bedroom the summer after his first year and starved. I took Harry with me when I went off to get the healing the ministry ordered, and you know what they found for Harry. Malnutrition and stunted growth. I wonder how that happened. I don't know what to say. Albus said dejectedly. Because what could he say? He had missed abuse, actual abuse. Certainly Poppy had told him about the malnutrition, but he had dismissed it as the usual childish fussy eating habits he saw with many students. It was the reason why the Hogwarts food was laced with mild nutrient potions. He wanted to say that Harry had exaggerated his claims, as Albus had assumed had happened with the story the Weasley twins had told their parents and Remus, but the official report compiled by an era that Albus himself trusted and the head of the DMLE made a mockery of that want. You could have told the Dursleys in your letter that minimal contact included a yearly visit by you or Minerva, if not Remus. You could have informed them that they were being watched by someone stationed in the neighborhood. You could have paid more attention to Harry's health and his living situation when he entered Hogwarts. Sirius berated him, and Albus let him because he deserved every word. He ran over the reasons he had given for staying away and couldn't find an acceptable one. He wondered why Arabella hadn't informed him of the abuse. Had she too been blind to it? Do you know that when we were coming out of the Shrieking Shack, before we got attacked by the Dementors, I asked Harry if he wanted to live with me then? And he said yes. Straight away. Sirius gestured impatiently at Albus. No hesitation. What child does that? What must happen in a child's home that he believes he would be better off living with a complete stranger? You may scold me all you wish, Albus said tiredly, feeling every year of his age. I shall not stop you. It appears that you are correct. I have made mistakes in Harry's regard. I thought I was doing the right thing. Sirius regarded him with a hard look, but he subsided, slumping back in his chair again. Well, he won't go back there again. Albus revived a little as a jolt of alarm ran through him. He must. He blurted out without thinking and regretted the words as soon as they passed his lips as Sirius straightened and regarded him with pure contempt. He will never return to the Dursleys. Sirius blazed. I realize that changes will need to be made, Albus said hurriedly, but the value of the blood protection is vital now more than ever. I'll talk to the Dursleys obviously and warn them against any abusive behavior, and perhaps you can stay with Harry to chaperone them and... Are you insane? Sirius rose to his feet and Albus could feel the house magic respond, crackling around him as it rose to meet its master's anger. He marched away from Albus to a window and took some deep breaths. Albus remained silent, understanding that Sirius was calming himself and his magic. It would be insane to disturb him. You don't send a child back into an abusive home for any reason. Sirius said forcefully, once he'd gotten his magic under control. Forcing a child to be in the presence of people who hate him openly even with a chaperone, do you really think that does no harm? Merlin, you're supposed to be an educator of children. He looked over his shoulder and glowered at Albus. You intend to repeat your mistake, headmaster. Put the supposed value of your all-important blood protection ahead of Harry having a warm and loving environment to nurture him. The words were sharply mocking and Albus sighed. The blood protection is important if Harry is to survive when Voldemort returns. I am deeply sorry that Harry has suffered to secure his protection, but he owes his life to it. Yes, Sirius said, turning around and folding his arms over his chest. Let's talk about why he had to be saved by the blood protection again at the end of his first year, shall we? Albus blushed, knowing it was his fault. He raised a hand in weary acceptance. I accept that I made mistakes that year with Harry and the situation with Quirrell and Voldemort. I believed the measures I had taken would guarantee Harry's safety, but I admit I underestimated both him and Voldemort. Sirius walked back to his desk and sat down. I understand as an educator you prefer to allow children to express themselves and only step in when they go too far, to learn their lesson by getting their hands burned a little in the fire so they realize it's hot, to have the opportunity and freedom to learn life lessons on their own. He had no idea where Sirius was going with his sudden change in subject, but Albus assumed it was nowhere good for Albus. So I get why you allowed Harry and his friends to investigate the mystery. I'm sure they weren't the only ones. Declaring something a no-go area to children is like waving a red flag to a bull. The dryness of his tone was somehow even more chiding than his anger. I know James and I would have been up to the third-floor corridor in a flash. Sirius pointed at Albus. But to encourage their curiosity when you knew the danger, when you were responsible for the danger, was beyond the pale. You set a trap for a Dark Lord in a school full of children, headmaster. He said coldly. You used my son, James's and Lily's son, as bait, and he ended up in no less than 4 life-threatening situations. You allowed a man possessed by Voldemort to teach. You placed dangerous creatures within the school. You failed to fulfill your duty of care 10 times over. Albus couldn't argue with him. He nodded despondently. It was not one of my better moments, Sirius, and believe me when I say I learned from it. I would not do the same again. Well, the second-year disaster when Harry was almost killed by a basilisk wasn't your fault, I give you that, Sirius said. Dear Merlin, the boy really had talked of his adventures. Albus sighed heavily. But you didn't do much to ensure the safety of the school either. What were you thinking allowing the school to remain open when there was a basilisk roaming the corridors? I could not locate the chamber to deal with the basilisk and there was no information on who was being possessed. Albus defended himself briskly. If I had merely closed the school, neither issue would have been resolved and the problem would just have reoccurred once the students returned. I confess that I did overlook Myrtle quite badly as a source of information, but alas, I assumed her place of death was meaningless as a clue. Sirius nodded. Okay, I can accept that, although there were other additional precautions you could have taken, hiring some more roosters once the first lot were killed, for instance. But then there's the whole matter of allowing Harry to be mostly ostracized for being a Parselmouth. He held up a hand. I know it goes with your theory of education. Children need to learn to handle rejection and not always being liked, but you fail to realize that not stepping in condones the poor behavior of prejudiced children being mean to another child. Just as never stepping in to stop bullying behavior allows it to continue and punishes the child being bullied. We have recently realized this and have agreed a new bullying policy. Albus rejoined, ignoring that his agreement had been grudging and given only after Minerva's sharp words on the subject. Does that include stopping the staff bullying the students too? Sirius remarked crisply. You're referring to Severus? Albus said with a sigh. I have talked with him about his behavior with Harry. Sirius harumphed. Albus decided he had been on the defensive too long. Shall we discuss why Harry was in danger last year? Sirius gave a small laugh. Oh, I accept my part, and I'll even admit that I know you were forced to take the Dementus as guards under severe protest since Cornelius already confessed all to me, but you still didn't ward the passageways into the school, didn't think to leave an alarm on the Shrieking Shack, didn't think to specifically alarm Gryffindor Tower. I got into the dorm. If I'd really been after killing Harry, I would have succeeded. The criticism hurt, and Albus could see in hindsight that he should have done those things. It just hadn't occurred to him, as he had been confident his security measures were sufficient. Perhaps there needs to be a security review, he murmured. I believed the usual wards would inform me if you entered the school, which they failed to do. I have come this close, Sirius held up his forefinger and thumb showing a distance of less than an inch, to finding Harry a different school. Albus's eyes widened with horror. The financial impact if Harry withdrew would be tremendous, as others would follow in his wake. The damage to Hogwarts' reputation would be immense, and, sentimentally, Albus wanted Harry himself to simply attend and enjoy Hogwarts as Albus had done, as James and Lily had done. However, Sirius said, Harry loves Hogwarts. So he stays, and I will be taking the black seat on the Board of Governors. He looked over at Albus, and for the first time the fire that had been in his eyes had disappeared. A security review seems to be a good idea, especially since you're opening up the school to the Triwizard Tournament. I would appreciate your help, Albus said immediately, and perhaps I can convince Amelia to put some of the new funds at her disposal towards the tournament. He smiled at Sirius proudly. That was well done today, my boy, very well done indeed. He could admit that Sirius had played the Wizengamot like a harp, just like Archerus. The House of Black had always wielded immense wealth and power in pursuit of its political goals. He could even admit that he agreed with most of the decisions Sirius seemed to have made. That he had taken a position that placed the House of Black staunchly against the Dark Lord was fantastic news, but his actions in regards to the Lestranges was worryingly ruthless. Everybody deserved a chance for redemption. Sirius waved away the praise. We've meandered from the point. Yes, we have. Albus admitted. I concede that Harry going back to the Dursleys would be difficult for him, but I don't see any other way to maintain the blood protection. Measures can be taken to ensure Harry had minimal contact with them, but I'm sorry, Sirius, I must insist he return there. Sirius's eyes fired up again. You just don't listen, do you? Firstly, you mustn't insist anything. You don't have the authority under any of your many positions to tell me to do anything in regards to my son. I am his blood, legal and magical guardian, not you. You are nothing more than his headmaster and, if you ever get your head out of your ass, a possible friend and ally. Albus blinked at the caustic tone and harsh language. There's no need for that, my boy. I think there's every reason, because you don't seem to understand that, Harry will never go back to the Dursleys. He punctuated each word by stabbing his finger onto his desk. The blood protection. The Dursleys are no longer at Privet Drive. Sirius cut him off harshly. Albus froze and examined the younger wizard's intent expression. What did you do? I gave them a new house with new wards. Petunia was ecstatic about living in her dream town and without Harry. Sirius sat back, looking unconcerned. But the blood wards will fail very shortly, Sirius pointed out. With nobody of Lily's blood residing there. Albus closed his eyes. Then the blood protection is fine, Sirius said. Albus snapped his eyes open in shock. Remus tracked down the spell he and Lily had discussed. It mentioned that the blood protection would erode without an anchor of blood within a home. Luckily, Remus found an adoption blessing within the same text. Sirius explained. We did the ritual yesterday as it has to be performed by the women of the house. Harry's blood protection is anchored by black blood now. And you couldn't have told me this before? Albus asked, genuinely irritated at how Sirius had allowed him to believe the blood protection was in danger and gone. No. Sirius wagged a finger at him. I was interested to know if you'd put Harry's best interests first and whether you'd be willing to listen to someone else's view. Ah. Albus felt a rush of chagrin and reached for a lemon biscuit in the absence of his comforting Muggle sweets. I rather failed your test, I fear. I wouldn't say you'd get a troll. Sirius said dryly. Just a dreadful. Albus sighed and munched his biscuit. He wasn't sure how he could patch things up. He'd been so certain that he knew best. On one hand, he was despondent at losing control of the situation, and yet, on the other, he admired Sirius's and Remus's ingenuity. They had achieved both securing Harry a happy home where he was loved and the maintenance of the blood protection, something Albus had failed to do. If I was your professor, I would say that you need to stop believing that you're the only one with the answers, share your problems with others and listen to them, and most importantly, acknowledge that there are more important things in raising a child than simply keeping him alive. Sirius said crisply. Sirius got back to his feet and walked over to the mantelpiece where he looked at the crest of the House of Black for a long moment, leaving Albus to consider his words of advice. Albus took a drink of tea to wash down the biscuit. So how is your search for the Horcruxes going? Sirius asked suddenly. His tea went down the wrong way and Albus coughed violently, in danger of choking for a long moment. He took a breath to recover and Sirius passed him a conjured glass of water. Albus drank deeply and sighed with relief as the soreness in his throat eased. Sirius returned to his seat. Anything you would like to share? Albus stared at him and wondered just how much Sirius knew. Did he know about the Horcrux within Harry? He had mentioned that they'd attended a healing clinic, or was his knowledge restricted to the diary that Harry would have described in telling all about his second-year adventure with the basilisk? He recalled that the discussion about the blood protection had been a test and he had failed. This was his second chance, Albus realized. If he did not give full disclosure here. I believe I have much to share and not all of it good news. Albus offered gravely. You know of the diary, I presume? Sirius gave a slow nod. He propped his head up with one hand, his elbow resting on the table. His head of house ring glinted at Albus. As soon as I saw it I knew what it was. Such a vile act, a vile trick to flee from death, indeed. Albus said, with renewed disgust at what Tom had done. I'm not certain, but I think the diary was an accident created by the death of Myrtle, as Tom called the basilisk forth from the chamber when he was a student at Hogwarts. He poured much of his personality between its pages, and when he killed her, the damage to his soul caused it to fracture and a piece sheared away and became one with the diary. He sighed heavily. Whether Tom's interest in Horcruxes predated that incident or whether he had already started to learn of them, I rather believe when he realized that the diary had been turned into more than a journal when it wrote back to him, it prompted his curiosity and led him to a conversation with Horace. Old Sloane. Sirius grimaced. Sluggy would have had access to a lot of dark knowledge through his network. If he didn't know about Horcruxes, I'm sure he would have known someone who did to point Tom at. And I fear he did. Albus said. I tracked Horace down last summer, but he refused outright to admit to any discussion. His entire demeanor was one of heavy guilt. He sipped his tea. I believe once Tom had confirmed what the diary was, he stopped writing into it, possibly around the middle of his 6th year. But no doubt Tom made others. He would not have stopped at 1. 3 may have been his initial goal, 7 is more likely. He had an obsession with the number. How many he made before his confrontation with Harry that night. Good Merlin, the prophecy. Another piece of vital information he had kept to himself for so long. Was he meant to give that up too? Maybe he could offer what was already known by Tom. His eyes sharpened on Sirius. Tom believed, you see, that Harry was the one prophesied to vanquish him. The Death Eater who overheard and reported it to him only heard the first part of the prophecy, but it was enough to identify Harry and young Neville as possible candidates. It was why I encouraged both families into hiding. Sirius nodded. You know the full prophecy. I do, but I would not want to burden Harry with the full weight of it at his age. Albus admitted frankly. For a long moment, Albus thought Sirius was going to press him further, and there was a worrying shimmer of rage that flickered across Sirius's face before it faded into an expressionless mask that simply made Albus more anxious. So you don't have any idea of the number of Horcruxes Voldemort made before he was made a Wraith? Sirius returned to the topic of Horcruxes, much to Albus's relief. My intention this summer is to start reviewing Tom's life and backtracking to see when and where he could have made them. Albus admitted. Sirius nodded almost absently. He opened another desk drawer and another piece of parchment drifted out to hover in front of Albus. He took it and thanked Merlin he'd put his tea down. Regulus Black had just made his job much easier. Well, this is splendid, Albus said, delighted. I can make some guesses as to the items and locations using this list, and the Dom is going to form a team to track them down and destroy them, Sirius said dryly. Albus looked up in alarm. You told Bertie about the Horcruxes? Bertie, Cornelius and Amelia in general terms, I called them objects that kept Voldemort from dying, Sirius confirmed to Albus's horror. Bertie understood what I meant obviously. The Dom has researched Horcruxes before and they know how to dispose of them. As I said, he's going to put a small team together. Bill Weasley will join it to provide his curse-breaking skills in repayment of his sister's life debt to Harry and to give me an inside man. He also knows the full picture, he's come across them in Egypt. His plans unraveled before Albus's eyes. That Sirius could risk the information from leaking in such a way. All the team will be under vows, all capable of occlumency, Sirius said as though he'd read Albus's mind. We're calling it Operation Treasure Hunt. Albus placed the parchment down and regarded Sirius with disappointment. Nevertheless, the likelihood of this hunt getting back to Voldemort has increased substantially. We could have kept this between us and hunted them down ourselves. And how long would that take us? Asked Sirius pointedly. I want this done quickly before Voldemort regains a body and is operating at full strength. Yes, there's a risk, but this is the Dom's specialty. They are trained for this. He paused. Just as the DMLE is now on alert that Voldemort didn't die and may be attempting a comeback. They are going to start tracking the known Death Eaters that walked for lack of evidence. The Wizengamot today, Albus realized, his mind racing, you and Cornelius were laying the foundation to undermine Tom's political power. And financial, Sirius said. Albus nodded slowly because he could already see how Sirius would use the power of the House of Black and the House of Potter to control the Ministry and the Wizengamot and reshape the wizarding world, all for the protection of the boy Sirius loved as a son. Remarkable. He had always believed love was the power Tom knew not. There's a war council, Sirius said, and you're invited to be part of it. Everyone is agreed your help and advice would be welcome. Penelope will send you the details of the meeting times. I would be delighted to assist, Albus said. He could still backtrack through Tom's life, but it seemed he would not do so alone. He remembered Sirius's chiding comments after the blood protection discussion and mused that it might not be a bad thing, although he still worried about so much vital information being so widely known. Albus sighed heavily. The next piece of information I have for you, I suggest you do not share with anyone. He held Sirius's curious gaze determinedly. The night Tom attacked Harry, I believe he created another accidental Horcrux within Harry. He gestured across the desk. I bound Harry's core to prevent the remnant becoming powerful and assuming control of the child. It does restrict the conscious amount of power Harry can access, although he is capable of overcoming that, as his mastering of the Patronus charm demonstrates. He searched for the right words and found none. To defeat Tom, I'm afraid Harry must also die. Harry had the Horcrux removed at the healing clinic, although he believes he simply had his scar cleansed of dark magic. They removed your binding afterwards and we've been practicing bringing his magic under control, Sirius told him bluntly. If you want confirmation you can write to Noshi Blackhawk. The news that Harry was cleansed of Tom's darkness, that he would not need to die, rushed through Albus, and stole his breath. Harry could live, grow old. He felt his emotions surge, an enormous wave of relief followed immediately by an almost oppressive amount of guilt. Why had it never occurred to him to seek the counsel of someone like Noshi? You must think me a monster. Albus thought out loud, blinking back tears of remorse. Noshi told me you could have killed Harry that Halloween's night and you didn't, so no, I don't think you're a monster. Sirius said calmly. I'm not happy with you. You could have sought help and advice, if not immediately at the time, certainly in the years since and especially before Harry got to school. And there it was again, Sirius's painful lesson that Albus share information and listen to others. He could have approached Noshi. He knew the man was a good soul and a consummate healer who took issues of confidentiality seriously. He shook his head. You are right to be angry with me. I have made many mistakes. All I can offer as mitigation is that I believed I was protecting him and that I do care for him tremendously. Sirius sighed and sat back, looking at Albus pensively. I'm angry at you, Albus. The use of his given name didn't go unnoticed by Albus. It was the first time since they had talked that Sirius had consented to use it. He felt a stirring of hope. If Harry had been inclined to pursue a prosecution against the Dursleys, and if it wouldn't have completely destabilized our society which considers you a moral icon, I would have encouraged him to bring charges against you two for child endangerment and neglect. Sirius informed him briskly. Albus flinched sharply. You have 3 important positions in our society, but you have made serious errors of judgment both as Chief Warlock and as Headmaster of Hogwarts. Sirius continued. Any other person would have resigned following the disclosure that they had failed to give an innocent man a trial, yet both you, and Crouch for that matter, have wriggled out of it, placing the blame on Bagnold, who is dead and can't defend herself. Another flinch. He couldn't deny it. Sirius motioned at Albus. Your decisions as headmaster, certainly for Harry's first year if not his second, should also have led to dismissal. He pinned Albus with a hard grey stare. Again, a noble man would have resigned. He sat back. Yet, I can't deny that if Voldemort is attempting to rise again, if you were not headmaster, he'd consider Hogwarts as vulnerable, and so I can't demand you to do the noble thing in repayment for all the crap you've put Harry through. Albus breathed out a little. And I'm mostly not the injured party. Sirius continued. Harry believes you care about him, and I have attempted to maintain that impression while trying to explain your actions or inaction when he's questioned it, such as your decision not to look in on him after you placed him with the Dursleys. In truth, I rather think he's already forgiven you. Personally, I think he's too forgiving because of the self-esteem issues that living with the Dursleys have left him with. But he has too few people in his life who he believes genuinely care for him, and I won't deny him any one of those people. I will offer him an unreserved apology. Albus said quickly. Sirius nodded. Understand this, Albus, Harry is mine to protect now. You're done making decisions about his home, his life and his future. I don't believe that prophecies are written in stone. I will do everything I can to remove Voldemort from existence so Harry doesn't have to face him again. You get in the way of that and I don't care how powerful you are, you and I will come to blows. Albus bristled slightly at the tone, but he knew Sirius meant every word of it and was quite capable of carrying out his threat. Albus was the more powerful wizard, but Sirius had shown a sneakiness that had completely overturned all of Albus's plans within the space of a mere month. I promise to work with you, Sirius, and I promise to do better in sharing and listening to others. Sirius harumphed, and there was a definite air of I'll believe it when I see it as he got to his feet. I have to get back to Harry and I think we're done for today. He gestured at the report still on the desk while placing the parchment on the Horcruxes back in his desk. That's your copy. Albus stifled the urge to ask to see Harry, his want to know where Harry was so that he could monitor him. He picked up the report and let Sirius walk him to the flue. They exchanged brief words of goodbye before Albus entered the flames. He walked out of the fireplace and into his office at Hogwarts. Fawkes trilled a comforting welcome. He placed the report on his desk, his fingers tracing over it thoughtfully. He wondered if he dared read it, and knew that he would. He had been a Gryffindor once, and it was only right that he learn of the consequences of his decision. He glanced over to the set of monitoring instruments and waved his wand to shut down all but the one that kept track of Harry's life force. He wandered over to the window to look over the grounds, letting the soothing familiarity of the school ease him. His plans were smashed to smithereens, Albus considered with wry amusement. Unsurprisingly when dealing with the marauders, for he had no doubt that Remus had played his part in the scheme and would continue to do so. The group had been the best of their generation with the exception of Pettigrew, who had been inclined to laziness, and their generation had been exceptional, Severus, Lily, Alice, so many wonderful witches and wizards. It was easy to see the bare bones of Sirius's plan from the events at the Wizengamot. He intended to shut down Tom's second grab for power before it began. The Dom would deal with the Horcruxes, the DMLE with the Death Eaters, and the Ministry and Wizengamot would reshape the political and financial landscape and make it unfriendly to Tom, less of a breeding ground for followers, which would make recruitment more difficult for him. It was a good plan despite Albus's concerns that it involved too many people knowing critical information. But Albus felt almost adrift. He no longer held the rudder but was reduced to a passenger in the boat. Oh, he had no doubt he would contribute especially to the Horcrux hunt and to the politics. He did have some sway on the light side, and no doubt his expertise would be valued, but he sighed heavily. He felt so old. Useless. Fawkes trilled and swooped over from his perch to sit on Albus's shoulder. Albus stroked his friend's head gently, grateful for Fawkes' unwavering support. Sirius's plan also kept Harry well away from the fight, Albus mused idly, or at least tried to keep Harry away from the fight. But Albus thought Sirius was wrong about the prophecy. He hadn't been a fan of divination himself before witnessing Sibyl's declaration and could understand Sirius's point of view, but ultimately it didn't matter because Tom believed the prophecy. So, no, Albus had no doubt that Harry would have faced Tom in battle again. But Harry no longer had to be the one to die. Albus didn't need to shape the boy so he would sacrifice his own life. He didn't need to hope beyond hope that Tom would seek to use Harry's blood in creating a body and thus provide an anchor so Harry had an impossible chance to survive death, a long shot if ever there was one. The relief of that made his knees tremble. It had been the part of the plan that Albus had hated, had always hated. To know that he didn't have to groom the boy in such a way, that such a stain would not be added to those already on his soul. Ariana Gellert was a weight off his shoulders. He pursed his lips. The problem was that if Harry was not to die in battle, he would need to fight Tom and match him if not beat him. Nothing Albus had previously planned involved that scenario. Harry was a gifted Dada student natural, but beyond that Albus hadn't seen the need to offer additional training or education. In fact, Albus would have denied Harry such a thing if he'd asked, because when Harry discovered he needed to die, that Albus hadn't given him any training to survive would underscore how much Albus believed that Harry needed to die. That Harry lacked confidence in his own worth because of the Dursleys would have just made convincing him easier, albeit Albus hadn't planned it that way and he honestly hadn't realized that they'd been anything other than unloving. Albus sighed. Severus had informed him that the Dark Mark was growing stronger. Harry would no doubt meet Tom sooner rather than later. And Harry needed training probably more than Sirius would allow if he knew the reason for it. But wasn't Harry's core unbound? Albus remembered how powerful Harry had been as a mere babe. Everybody in the Order had heard James boast of Harry turning into a puppy at 4 months. Harry was a powerful wizard and he would need someone who understood that power, who was just as powerful, someone like Albus. He smiled. He would do all he could to train Harry to fight Tom, and he could do it all in the guise of helping Harry control his power, so Sirius didn't worry that he was forcing the issue of Harry fighting Tom. He felt a touch of satisfaction fill him. He nudged Fawkes, who flew back to his perch, and hurried back to his desk to start making plans for Harry's education, but he stopped short at the sight of the report. The front parchment with its seal of the Ministry stared up at him. Within was the truth of what Harry had suffered because of the decisions Albus had made. But he needed read it, he needed to understand the damage to Harry's confidence and what would need to be done to correct that. Albus sat down at his desk, gathered his courage and opened the report. Oh, Harry, my poor boy. Chapter warning of mention of abuse. Oh. Severus Snape prided himself that his behavior was the epitome of everything Slytherin. He might only be a half-blood, but he comported himself with the pure-blood manners instilled in him by his mother and the cunning that dealing with his bigoted and intolerant Muggle father had required. Even his obvious less than Slytherin behavior, openly deriding the Gryffindors and specifically the boy who lived, maintaining a stern deportment, all were a choice designed for a Slytherin purpose. However, sitting in front of the wireless listening to the early evening news report of the Wizengamot session, Severus's calm Slytherin mask was completely destroyed, his only boon that he was alone with no one to witness his lack of composure, wide eyes, gaping mouth, pale face broken only by the slashes of red rage upon his cheeks, as he absorbed the shocking news. Sirius Black was Lord Black. Black Potter was Lord Potter, had been adopted by Black, and was now the heir of the House of Black. The Longbottom and Potter alliance was restored. It was blow after blow as the inane commentator waffled on about how handsome Black had looked in leather pants, and wasn't it a shame that Potter hadn't accompanied him. He waved his wand with a gesture that rather looked like the Muggle equivalent of giving someone the finger. His father had been a rather coarse man, and shut the infernal machine up. The news had left him more than a little horrified as he remembered Lucius's hints that morning. Severus snorted as he paced the small living area in his quarters at Hogwarts. If Black had called judgment and stripped the Lestranges of their magic for wearing the dark mark, he could understand why Lucius had bowed to Black. The head of the House of Malfoy was nothing if not a survivor, a true Slytherin able to talk his way out of every sticky situation. It would be galling for Lucius to have to conform to the will of Sirius Black, but he would do it if it meant keeping his magic. And there had been the interesting slip of information that Lucius knew of the Dark Lord's origins. Clearly Lucius found them lacking. Severus had been told the truth by Albus once he had been taken on as a spy, and found it more than a little amusing that the purebloods that so prostrate themselves at the feet of the Dark Lord had no idea that his origins were closer to Severus's than their own. Severus's brief smile faded. Lucius was now aligned with Black and Potter, and would work with him against the Dark Lord. That much was clear, even if the message had been coached in formal language that would give Lucius leeway with the Dark Lord should Severus ever mention it to him. Not that he would. Severus was proud of the fact that his own allegiances were well obscured. The former Death Eaters believed he was their spy among the light, and Albus believed he was his spy among the dark. Truthfully, Severus only had one allegiance: Lily Elizabeth Evans. He walked over to the small liquor cabinet and poured himself a small finger of oak-matured 20-year-old Scotch. Raised in the Muggle world, he had a preference for it rather than the drat dog dens that the Wizarding world favored. He downed the glass in one go, savoring the peaty taste. Lily had been his only friend as a child, the only one to see past a strange lank-haired, hook-nosed sallow youth and acknowledge the intelligent if serious boy inside. He had gloried in being able to introduce her to the Wizarding world and reveled in her innocent affection for him. All that had come tumbling down because of Hogwarts. In many ways he regretted ever setting foot in the school. Perhaps if they hadn't been separated by the house divides, if he had been homeschooled as his late mother had wanted and avoided the influence of those who would willingly serve the Dark Lord. But he had long accepted that it was his own fault their friendship had come to an end. In the summer before their 5th year he had asked her to pretend not to be friends with him anymore because he was under pressure from the rest of Slytherin House to conform to their prejudices, and with the rising influence of the Dark Lord, Severus was under no illusions that he would suffer if he didn't. Lily had been sympathetic and had agreed. But he could tell as the school year progressed, and he didn't shield her from the comments of his friends but agreed with them, as he stood aside and watched as the Slytherin girls tripped her with hexes and did nothing, although Lily fought back quite splendidly, that her patience and understanding were eroding. They disappeared entirely when he called her mudblood. Shame heated his cheeks to burning once again as the memory flooded back. James Potter turning him upside down to humiliate him, and Lily defending Severus only for Severus to deny her so harshly, and he hadn't meant it. He had never thought of her that way. But the damage had been done, and when he'd tried to apologize to her, she had told him that she had had enough. He had made his choice perfectly clear, and she would thank him to stay away from her. He'd left her alone at Hogwarts believing they had the summer to mend fences, but instead he'd had the summer to stew over his mistake further when Lily had pointedly refused to come to the door of her Muggle home and had instructed her sister to turn him away, something which Petunia had done with relish. In his anger, he had blamed the Marauders for the loss of Lily. He had spent the rest of the summer plotting. When he'd returned to Hogwarts he'd overheard Regulus Black talking with his friend Matthias Flint about his brother running away from home because their mother had finally flipped and beaten Black half to death. It was the perfect bait for his lure. He had easily provoked Black into telling him about the Homping Willow, and on the night of the full moon he had made his move to kill the werewolf and have Black expelled, leaving Potter alone and vulnerable. Only he had miscalculated, assuming Lupin's meek mild manner would carry over to his werewolf personality when it didn't, that Lupin in his werewolf form would be an easy target. The werewolf he had glimpsed had been angry and fierce and scared him half to death. When Potter had turned up and saved him, Severus had actually been grateful, and so angry at being grateful that he could have obliterated half of Hogsmeade. and then to rub salt in the wound. Albus Bloody Dumbledore had seen right through him, warned him against further action against the werewolf, and had refused to punish the Gryffindors harshly. A few detentions and a ban from Quidditch for Black and nothing for Potter and Lupin. Worse was to come though at the end of his 6th year when Lily had caved into Potter's pursuit of her and agreed to date him. Severus had gone to the Dark Lord willingly after that, taking the mark that summer and killing some poor Muggle man that had already been tortured half to death by Mulciber Sr. and who hadn't even defended himself as Severus had leveled his wand at him and pretended it was his father. The killing hadn't bothered him at the time. He had after all plotted to kill Lupin. As far as Severus was concerned, werewolves were creatures that should be put down as soon as they were discovered, no matter what anyone Dumbledore said, but he had come to regret it as an older and wiser man, understanding the sin that stained his soul better. In retrospect he was thankful. The Dark Lord had appreciated Severus's talent with potions, and so he had been excused the usual revelry and Muggle baiting. In his stupidity, he had decried not being able to attend, believing he was missing out on truly serving the Dark Lord. Then he had heard the beginning of a prophecy. He'd run to the Dark Lord with it. Severus bowed and kissed the hem of the Dark Lord's robes. "My lord, I have something I must tell you, but I believe it would be best to do so in confidence." The Dark Lord stared at him with hard red eyes, and Severus felt a pain deep in his head. He flinched as it left abruptly. The Dark Lord dismissed everyone from the room. "Now rise and tell me, Severus, what did you overhear?" the Dark Lord asked smoothly. Severus got to his feet and bowed his head respectfully. Dumbledore was interviewing a woman for the position of divination, and she gave him a prophecy. The one to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born as the 7th month dies, born to those who have thrice defied him, he paused and caught his breath. "Unfortunately, I didn't hear anything more before I was ushered out by the barman." "I see." The Dark Lord rose and circled Severus silently. Severus swallowed hard. Hadn't he done his duty? Wasn't his lord pleased with him? "Do you believe in prophecies, my dear Severus?" the Dark Lord asked suddenly. He had to swallow against a surge of fear before he could answer. "Honestly, no, my lord." "Then why such haste in bringing me this news?" The inference that Severus believed that someone would be born that could defeat his lord slid into Severus's mind like a sharp knife. He thought furiously. "I merely wished to warn you that the old fool Dumbledore had heard such a thing and may believe it." Severus hurried out, bowing his head again. The Dark Lord laughed harshly. "It would be the first time. He and I both have never put stock in the vagaries of tea leaves and dull predictions of cards." He whirled away back to his throne, his robes billowing out before he sat. "Still, there may be those who will believe, and it would be better to keep this drivel in mind." His red eyes met Severus's again. "You have done well, Severus. You will be rewarded in time." Some months later, Severus had read the St. Mungo's birth announcements and realized that one of the babies born at the end of July was Lily's child. Severus had tried to put it to the back of his mind, to tell himself the child was also the spawn of James Potter and he didn't care what happened to it, to Lily. He had worried though, knowing the depravities that the rest of the Death Eaters engaged in, the cruelty the Dark Lord was capable of employing against his enemies. Then Severus had been called alone to dine with the Dark Lord, a tremendous honor. "You have seen the birth announcements, I trust, Severus?" the Dark Lord asked once the meal was over. "I have, my lord," Severus admitted, and he knew 2 babies could fulfill the conditions in the prophecy. Both sets of parents had defied his lord, both children born at the end of July. "I have been told that Dumbledore visits the families regularly." The Dark Lord sneered. "Obviously he has succumbed finally to senility to place his hopes in such a flimsy thing as a prophecy." "He is desperate, my lord," Severus replied sincerely. "Your side wins more ground every day." "Yes," the Dark Lord muttered, "desperate, and desperate men do desperate things." He conjured 2 glasses of cognac and handed one to Severus. "I believe Dumbledore will try and use one of these infants against me. I need a spy to determine which he will use." He swirled the liquid around the glass and pinned Severus with unrelenting red eyes. "You were once friends with the wife of the blood traitor Potter. To my shame, we grew up in the same neighborhood." Severus knew it was folly to lie to the man. "You are aware that Dumbledore knows that it was you who overheard the prophecy?" The Dark Lord smiled menacingly as Severus had nodded jerkily. There will soon be a vacancy for the position of potions professor at Hogwarts. You will apply for the job and at the interview request sanctuary within the walls of Hogwarts, having felt remorse for placing the son of your old childhood friend at risk after informing me of the prophecy. You will tell the old fool that you have changed your mind about serving me. My lord. Severus stuttered. He will know. I cannot. You will, Severus. The Dark Lord said bluntly. You will train with Bellatrix in the art of occlumency between now and your meeting with Dumbledore. It will hide your thoughts and true allegiance from him. You will take your place in his band of blood traitors and inform me of everything, but especially anything to do with the prophecy. He had agreed. What else could he do? It had turned out to be his salvation. Occlumency had been difficult, but working through his memories with Bellatrix laughing derisively at his upbringing and his friendship with Lily had seeded doubts in his own mind about whether he had chosen the right path. And by the time he had attended his interview and wept crocodile tears on Dumbledore's robes about regretting his choices, he had in truth been wavering and thankful that his occlumency was good enough that he could keep both Dumbledore and the Dark Lord from knowing what was really going on in his head. Dumbledore's request for him to be a spy had been approved by the Dark Lord, who had laughed when Severus had reported to him. Let him think you are his. The Dark Lord smiled, but you and I know you will always be mine. The Dark Mark had ached for days after that, the Dark Lord's subtle reminder of who Severus had sworn his life to serving. And as the months had passed and Severus spent more time with Dumbledore, with the rest of the Hogwarts staff and away from the Death Eaters, as he had seen the crushed faces of children who lost their parents and families to the Dark Lord's thirst for power and blood, he had become less enthralled with his own Death Eater identity. He had instead embraced his spy role. The spying had come naturally to him, and he had quickly realized he occupied a position of power within both camps. He decided which raids to share, who was saved and who was lost to an extent. He controlled vital information, not all of it but some of it. He secretly gloried in his position. But the events of Halloween in 81 had shattered his delusion, and it was a delusion. He could see it with hindsight. The Dark Lord had summoned him and informed him of his plan to attack the Potters, as he needed a child to fulfill a ritual, and why not one prophesied to defeat him. Severus had almost panicked, but he had kept his head and asked for Lily as a reward in the hopes of saving her. Her husband and child were of no consequence, but Lily. He should have known she would die trying to save her son. He should have known the Dark Lord would not choose to stun her when he could kill her. The harsh reality was that he had led the Dark Lord to the Potters, to Lily. He had signed their death warrants by informing the Dark Lord of the prophecy. In the aftermath, Dumbledore had guilted him into promising to help her son. Severus hated that he had made the promise in his weakness. It served its purpose in solidifying for Dumbledore that Severus worked for the light, but Potter wasn't the reason, his promise wasn't the reason. The Dark Lord had killed Lily, and for that he would pay. Severus had always been Lily's despite the fact that she had only briefly been his, and he would avenge her death by making certain the Dark Lord went to his. Protecting Potter was necessary for that to happen. That was the only reason he protected the boy. Severus poured another glass of whiskey. The truth was that he would always want to trade the brat who lived for the mother who died, Harry Potter, for Lily Evans. That Lily would hate him if he did, would hex him to the end of the earth and back for thinking such a thing. He sighed heavily. He couldn't stop himself from hating the child who Lily had died to save, believing deep down that if Harry Potter had never existed, never been born, Lily would never have been targeted, would never have died. His hate was only exacerbated by the fact that Harry Potter was a miniature James, except for Lily's eyes staring out at him accusingly, entirely too Gryffindorish, entirely too arrogant without regard for the rules or authority, entirely too thin and small. Severus rolled his eyes expressively and pinched the bridge of his nose. He would not consider that the headmaster was right in his statement that Potter was not spoiled. Of course, Black would soon rectify that, Severus thought darkly. A pop alerted him to the presence of a house elf. What? The headmaster is requesting heads of houses come directly to his office. Very well. Severus put down his whiskey glass with a thunk, cast a brief mouth-freshening charm and strode out of his quarters. No doubt the old fool wanted to talk about Black's lordship. Black was going to be insufferable. Severus snorted. What did he mean was going to be? Black already was insufferable, always had been. He was the last to arrive and he slid into the remaining chair by a grumpy-looking Poppy. A brief glance at his other colleagues confirmed they were all disgruntled at being called so peremptorily. Albus appeared oblivious to their irritation. He sat sedately behind his desk with a bulky sheaf of parchments in front of him. "Thank you for coming and on short notice," Albus said. "I called you together for two reasons, but both are related, and are to do with Harry Potter." "If this is an announcement that Sirius Black is also Lord Black," Phileas interrupted, "I think we're all aware the wireless has been filled with news of little else." "In a way it is, and in another, not at all." Albus held up one wrinkled and age-spotted hand. "Let me explain. I met with Sirius this afternoon after the Wizengamot session. As you have no doubt heard, he has already taken custody of Harry Potter." His expression fell suddenly and Severus felt a twinge of concern at how old Albus looked. The reason why he was given immediate custody was because of this document. He tapped the parchment. "It is a report compiled by Amelia Bones and Alastair Moody about Harry's home environment with his aunt and uncle. It concludes that the environment was abusive and recommended Harry's immediate removal from it." "My word!" Phileas muttered in shock. Minerva bristled angrily beside Phileas. "I told you." She snapped at Albus, her Scottish brogue thick with anger. "I told you when you left him there that they were the worst kind of muggles. But did you listen to me?" "No." Severus was taken aback at her ferocity. "He didn't listen to me either." Poppy all but snarled. "Every year I've reported the boy is malnourished and suffering the signs of physical neglect and care, that he has stunted growth and health issues, and every year, Albus, you've waved me away with what were obviously empty assurances." Albus didn't defend himself. "You may berate me all you wish, Minerva, Poppy. I regret that I did not listen to you as I should have done in my belief that I knew best. I erred badly." If the topic had been anything other than Potter, Severus would be amused at Albus's self-pitying guilt. The headmaster only had himself to blame for the hurts done to his golden boy. Albus had been the one to place him and the one to cavalierly dismiss the signs of abuse. Pomona cleared her throat. "What specifically did his relatives do to Mr. Potter?" "In general terms, most of the abuse was verbal. He was never called by his name but rather freak or boy or some other derogatory term. He was regularly told he was a burden. Physically, he was set to chores above his age range and inappropriately dangerous for a child to attempt. He received slaps and hits with various implements at an early age but apparently learned how to duck and avoid them by the age of 6. It explains his talent as a seeker," commented Severus snidely. Minerva glared at him. "Continue, please, Albus," Pomona said briskly. "If we are to know how to help the child we must know of what damage has been done, just as always in these cases. He was denied food on a regular basis and underfed as a matter of course. Beyond that, his cousin bullied him badly, injuring him severely on 2 documented occasions although his magic usually healed him. Materially, he was neglected. Second-hand clothes, no toys or books were given to him beyond the bare minimum required for his schoolwork, no meaningful presents. He slept in a cupboard under the stairs until the age of 11 when he was given the smallest room in the house." Albus sighed heavily. Possibly that was because of the arrival of his first Hogwarts letter. The abuse also diminished somewhat after he was collected by Hagrid, although each summer there have been reoccurrences in some form. "My word," Phileas said again. "How could they?" "They could because they had no reason to think that they couldn't," Minerva said heatedly. "You never once checked up on him, Albus. Not once. You kept all of us with any tie to his parents away from him for his own safety, and look. He wasn't safe at all. Arabella Figg was stationed nearby and meant to keep an eye on him, and I have talked with her via flu since reading the report, wondering how she could have missed this," Albus said defensively. "Unfortunately, we had a miscommunication and she believed I was aware of the full extent of his treatment at the hands of his relatives, whereas I believed they were perhaps unloving toward him but otherwise tolerant and certainly not abusive." "Does it matter?" asked Severus, impatiently. He flicked some lint off his robes. "So the boy was abused. I fail to see why that merits special treatment." "It merits the same treatment as all abused children in this school. We always discuss the best approach to take with an abused child." Pomona remonstrated with him sharply. You forget the majority of those come into my house. She was right, most of the abused sorted into Hufflepuff where they received the affection and friendship they yearned for, the security and stability their magic required to settle down. However, those abused children who retained some spirit usually sorted into Slytherin, as cunning and sneakiness were both required in the retention of that spirit. Severus refused to think of Potter sympathetically or to pity him. Many were abused worse than Potter, and his own childhood hadn't been a picnic. No, Potter might have reasons for some of his more irritating traits, including his lack of respect for authority, but he was still a detestable brat. And the rest usually come into mine. Severus retorted. My point is, why are we having this discussion now in the middle of the holidays when it should be scheduled for the start of year preparation when we discuss all such cases? Perhaps if I was allowed to finish, you would all discover the reason, Severus. Albus said tersely. Everyone, not just Severus, squirmed under the rebuke. Firstly, I agree with Severus that deciding what the educational approach to Harry should be discussed in our usual meeting ahead of the term's start, Albus said crisply. However, there are medical concerns that need to be addressed immediately. Realizing there had been abuse, Sirius took Harry to the Valley Clinic in the States. They have corrected much of the physical consequences and I believe have dealt with some of the emotional issues. They also released a binding that I had placed on Harry's magic related to his scar. Harry has had a substantial increase in power and will need to relearn control before the school starts. I'll and offer my services for charms. Phileas said immediately. I'm already engaged for transfiguration. Minerva informed Albus frostily. Albus's eyebrows rose. I see. I did wonder with the Potter announcements whether you were aware that Sirius was Lord Black and of events generally. I had hoped you would have confided in me. Minerva harumphed. I had hoped that you had used a modicum of sense in placing Harry. It seems we've both lived to be disappointed. Severus exchanged an unsettled look with Pomona at the chilly glare between the head and his deputy. Albus Poppy was the one to break the tension. I assume you wish me to write to the clinic and get a full accounting of his medical records. Yes, Poppy. Harry's healer was Noshi Blackhawk. Sirius has given us permission to approach him. Albus agreed. He shifted position and folded his hands on top of the parchment. The second reason why I called you together is that Sirius raised concerns over the standards and safety here at the school to the point where he informed me he had considered withdrawing Harry. Severus snorted. If he wants to withdraw the brat, let him. Severus, don't be absurd. Phileas replied before Albus could. Apart from the severe damage to our reputation such an event would incur, where Potter goes, many would follow. We'd be lucky to have a school left. And therein lies the heart of the issue. Albus said. I would like your ideas and thoughts on how we can improve things. I have already decided to invite our new Dada professor, Alastair Moody, to move in for the rest of the summer and do a full security review of the school's wards and grounds. Well, that's a start. Pomona said, adjusting her robes. Personally, I'd like something to be done about Bins. His and a number of other subjects don't perform well at our level and should be audited. Minerva agreed. Divination should be dropped and Muggle studies needs a complete overhaul. I am in agreement. Phileas said. I'd also add that potions is another area of concern. Many of my students employ tutors in the summer to make up for deficits in their understanding. Severus glowered at him. It is not my fault most of them are dunderheads who can't understand the first thing to do with potions. Perhaps if you taught rather than simply bullied them it would help. Minerva snapped back. And perhaps. Enough, shouted Albus. We are not here to criticize each other's teaching styles. He took a deep breath. If there are no more ideas. They all shook their heads. Then thank you for your time. Please come to me with other suggestions as they occur to you. Albus said briskly. Severus, if you could remain behind, please. The others trooped out although Minerva remained behind briefly and waited until it was the three of them. Did you know, Albus, that I was considered as a potential guardian by Lily and James? Minerva asked bluntly. Albus sighed and nodded gravely. I did not think to bring it your attention, Minerva, because the will was missing and your claim was weak. And while you did caution me against the Dursleys, you did agree with me before we departed that it was for the best to leave him there. And for the first time Severus could remember, Minerva looked truly devastated. To my everlasting shame, I did, Albus, and I will never forgive myself. She swept out before Albus could reply. For a long moment there was silence and Albus looked as though his thoughts were far away. Severus cleared his throat. "Ah, Severus, my apologies for my wool gathering," Albus said, seemingly shaking off whatever had distracted him. "I need to inform you that Sirius is well aware of the prophecy and of the reality of Voldemort's imminent resurrection." "You informed him?" Severus spluttered, losing his cool for the second time that day. "He was aware of the latter and I believe in hindsight knew or suspected the former as he didn't press me about it," Albus said. "Sirius has a plan to defeat Voldemort and I have agreed we will work with him." Severus felt his lip curling up in disgust. "Additionally, it is more important than ever for you to be civil to Harry," Albus continued, "otherwise I have no doubt Sirius will call for an end to your tenure here or withdraw Harry." Of course he was to be civil to the brat, it didn't matter how cheeky and disrespectful the brat was to him. "I implore you to put the enmity with Sirius in the past." Of course he was simply to forgive and forget being bullied and thrown to a werewolf by Black, it didn't matter that Black had tried to murder him. For the sake of Lily's memory. Do not use her name in this. Severus snapped, surging out of his chair and striding to the window. He looked unseeingly at the grounds beyond, unknowing that Albus had done much the same earlier that day. Albus remained silent and Severus was glad of that as he brought his tumbling emotions back under control. Lucius reported that the House of Black was strong again. "He will stand with the House of Black," Severus reported calmly. "Clearly whatever else is uncertain, Black's abhorrence of the Dark Lord and his known ruthlessness will help decimate the Dark Lord's support among purebloods. He will work to end the Dark Lord once and for all." "Agreed," Albus said softly. "What is also certain is that Black will protect Potter." He paused for effect, "even from you." He could see from the reflection in the window that Albus flushed with embarrassment. "You need not worry, Headmaster," Severus sniped tersely, "I will continue to keep my promise and help protect Potter to defeat the Dark Lord since Black and I share those goals. But do not expect anything further and do not ask me again." "Thank you, Severus. If that is all?" he asked with a hint of his usual sneer. Albus hesitated but he nodded his head. Severus left the room quickly. There was still a good half a bottle of scotch left in his room and he intended to drink it all. Oh. Harry surfaced from his dozing at the sound of Sirius's voice greeting Remus. He didn't open his eyes immediately, too warm and fuzzy and tired to think about leaving the cocoon of blankets even for his godfather Padfoot, he reminded himself, and despite the fact that he wanted to know how things had gone. He could hear Sirius conjure up another chair and drag it close to the bed, the small knock as Sirius sat down and bumped the bed, Remus's low drawl as he confirmed Harry was sleeping just as he'd been sleeping every other time Sirius had checked. Harry felt Sirius's hand in his hair and reveled at the comforting touch, the knowledge that someone loved him. He was about to open his eyes when... "Well, don't keep me in suspense. What happened?" Remus demanded in a quiet voice that was obviously meant not to wake Harry. Harry kept his eyes shut. He didn't think Sirius would say anything he wouldn't tell Harry anyway, but there was always the possibility. He'd learned with the Dursleys that they'd often talk more freely when they'd forgotten he was in the room. Not that Sirius and Remus were anything like the Dursleys, and Harry felt a rush of gratitude that he'd gotten so lucky, that Sirius had rescued him with Remus's help. He dragged his attention back to the present and tuned in. You should have seen his face, it was a picture. Sirius sounded very amused. Dullard had to ask him if he was all right before he gave me the oath. And when Albus realized you'd taken custody of Harry, things got a bit sticky. He insisted on seeing the will. I think he was going to attempt to say that the proxy and guardianship couldn't pass to me because Frank and Alice couldn't decline in person. Augusta was furious. I can imagine. Then he kept questioning me about the notices, the adoption which Amelia stood up for, and told him where to go. Harry, being the heir to the House of Black, went down like a lead balloon with him, but he got told off by Tiberius Ogden of all people, and he got really snippy over the Lestranges. I'm surprised Augusta didn't tear him limb from limb. Remus murmured. Oh, I think if she could have done, she would. Sirius said. Anyway, she was up on her feet yelling at him, then grizzled our Marchbanks who I may have to kiss simply for saying that the tribunals did a piss-poor job of justice, then Bartholomew Wilkes told him off for challenging the use of family magic, and then old Tiberius told Albus he was going to take insult on my behalf if he didn't stop questioning me. It was a beautiful moment. Arthur got the ministry seat? Remus asked. He did. Cyrus confirmed. That was another beautiful moment. The whole place was in an uproar. I think Cornelius almost peed his pants with glee. Harry heard the shift of material as Sirius moved position. The best news ever though is that Umbridge is now somewhere in the jungles of Guyana. Sirius said cheerfully. Couldn't happen to a nicer toad. Remus replied in the same tone. Harry was hard-pressed not to join in when they snickered like naughty school children. And the budgetary stuff? Remus prompted as they sobered. Sirius shifted again and Harry almost started as he picked up Harry's hand. Better than we expected. Ogden, Knot and Greengrass matched my donation to the DOM and DMLE. That's astonishing, I know. If it's a signal they'll all ally in some way or at the very least stay neutral, it bodes well. Sirius said smugly. And the DMLE and the DOM get much needed funding. It also means that Lucius must have done some good in briefing his side, as much as I hate to admit it. Sirius acknowledged. Obviously Augusta was brilliant on the opposing side. Harry and I will be having dinner with the entire Old Potter Alliance on Saturday at the Longbottoms. Richard Bones all but said tell me when we can do the oath during the break. Harry will be pleased to see Neville. He sent him a plant as a get-well present. Remus said. He signed it your godbrother, Neville. Harry wanted to roll his eyes at Remus's amused tone. He personally was secretly really happy that Neville wanted to be his godbrother, had embraced the idea that their mothers were their respective godmothers as much as Harry had. They hadn't had the closest friendship ever at Hogwarts and Harry blamed himself for that. So he fully intended to send a thank you note back to Neville signing it your godbrother, Harry. You know Frank used to do the same with James because Doria was his godmother. Sirius commented and Harry could hear the smile in his voice. Minerva was James's, wasn't she? Yep. Sirius yawned. There was a brief lull and Harry was considering informing the pair of them that he was awake when Remus cleared his throat. I assume you spoke with Albus after. Oh, yes. Sirius said dryly. We talked. And I was only tempted to use the house magic to incinerate him once. Sirius said in the same dry tone. I take it he wanted Harry to go back to the Dursleys. Wouldn't take no for an answer until I pointed out the blood protection is now anchored by black blood. Sirius said. Harry was disappointed. He'd expected the headmaster to bring up the Dursleys, but he'd hoped deep down that Sirius and Remus would be proven wrong about him insisting on it. He did say steps would be taken, that Harry would have minimal contact with them, and I could even go along too to make sure they treated him right, but... Sirius sighed. He cares for Harry, I can see that, it's just his focus isn't in the right place. Well, that was slightly better. Maybe some of it is his age. Remus offered. You think he's going senile? Harry almost snorted a laugh. I mean his generation has a very different take on what is acceptable in raising a child. Remus said, taking on the tone that Harry knew meant Padfoot was going to get lectured. Historically, children, especially in the working classes, were expected to earn their keep, to contribute with difficult chores from a young age, to be grateful and respectful to their parents for food, clothing of any kind, and shelter. If they received praise and love beyond that, they were lucky, but it wasn't a big thing. Really, it's only this century that mind healers have emphasized that love and reward is an important component in raising a child to be a happy contributing member of society. I'm not sure I agree with you, Remus Sirius said firmly. I think Albus knows full well to raise a child in an unloving environment is not good for the child. He admitted he'd sacrificed Harry's happiness on the altar of the blood protection, although he didn't know quite how bad it was for Harry there. It was Remus's turn to sigh. You know, a part of me misses the days when I used to blindly accept Albus as the greatest wizard of our time, all-knowing and all-powerful. Well, there's nothing worse than finding your idol has feet of clay. Sirius commented. It's only natural even when you realize the truth that they are human to search for reasons and excuses for why they've done certain things that maintain the image of a hero. You never did recover from finding out Elton John wasn't a wizard. Funny. I'm right that Albus wasn't your hero though, aren't I? Remus asked idly. Harry listened with interest, wondering who Sirius had looked up to as an idol. You are Sirius said, I was raised a black, remember? We weren't brought up to worship at the altar of the great Albus Dumbledore, defeater of Grindelwald. No, Uncle Alphard was my hero. He thumbed his nose at the whole pure-blood thing, looked in on all the unwanted relatives, he was the epitome of cool, and he didn't abandon me after I ran off. Then he went and got himself killed. That wasn't exactly his fault. Remus pointed out. Of course it was. Sirius said. Idiot walked straight into an ambush with a pack of Death Eaters. I take it they were trying to recruit him. Voldemort wanted every black for his collection. Sirius murmured. I think my grandfather made some kind of deal that he'd join Voldy if he managed to convince everyone in the family to be marked. But he had to know you would never. Remus stopped abruptly in realization. Oh. Well, if he did, that was kind of devious of him, wasn't it? It was very clever of Sirius's grandfather, Harry mused silently. Because he'd known Sirius would never be marked, he'd be safe from having to submit to the deal. Yes. The rest of us had to deal with the bloody plonker while he got to stay safe behind the walls of the Black Country estate. Yes, the defenses there are rather lethal. Sirius coughed. I did apologize for not warning you. You're bloody lucky I wasn't incinerated. Remus said. I did give you the password to shut the wards down. Sirius said defensively. After I called you on the communication mirror and demanded it, Remus pointed out, while dodging a barrage of silver javelin curses, I might add. I apologized. Sirius retorted. Harry wanted badly to smile at their banter, but he shifted instead, drawing their attention to him, and they both muttered admonishments for the other to lower their voice so they wouldn't wake him. So what was the outcome with Albus in the end? Remus asked. We agreed that he'd help, he's going to be part of the War Council, and he had some thoughts about the treasure hunt. You should have seen him when I faced him with that. Sirius said. He wants to apologize to Harry about everything, so that's something. That made Harry feel better about his headmaster and the whole thing with the Dursleys. He was right, Professor Dumbledore did care about him. Are you going to let him? Asked Remus dryly. Of course, Sirius replied, if Harry decides that he wants to receive an apology. Emotions bombarded Harry. There was a strong wave of affection and love, maybe, for Padfoot for being so willing to do something because he loved Harry. But that was followed by a curious mix of annoyance at his headmaster that he'd been human and made mistakes at all, and a shameful need to move past the revelations of how Dumbledore had placed him with the Dursleys and hadn't checked on him, and confirmed that the headmaster truly cared about him, that it hadn't been an act. And the latter was just stupid, a small voice inside Harry's head whispered that sounded remarkably like Healer Fey. Why was it so important that the headmaster cared for him? He had other people in his life, other adults, who really cared about him, Padfoot and Moony Aunt Minerva. If he was going to forgive the headmaster, then shouldn't it be because it was the right thing to do, if it was a genuine apology, not just because Harry wanted the man to continue liking him? Confusing, mused Harry, it was all too confusing. He shifted again under the covers as his body responded to his mind's restless thoughts. Sirius's thumb rubbed over his knuckles as though to calm him, and it did surprisingly enough. He let his eyes drift open and found Sirius looking back at him with a warm smile. Hello, sleepyhead. Sirius greeted him. How are you feeling? Groggy. Harry said. Remus cleared his throat on the other side of the bed. I'll leave you to catch Harry up, Sirius. There's a book in the library at the manor I want to get before dinner. He ruffled Harry's bedhead hair with a smile and walked out. Want the bathroom? Sirius asked bluntly. Harry nodded. A shower, I think. He felt grimy. Let's see how you do when you get on your feet. Sirius said. He let go of Harry's hand and pulled back the covers. Harry gingerly swung his legs around and set his feet on the floor. He took Sirius's offered hand and pulled himself up. A slight rush of dizziness pulled at him, but he kept his head up and everything steadied. It was much better than the other times he'd tried it that day. Okay, Harry said. Sirius walked him over to the EN suite and Harry exchanged Sirius's arm for a wall. I'll be fine, Harry said. 5 minutes, Sirius said. Don't linger, and if you need me, yell, even if you're naked, understand? Harry felt his face redden, but he managed a brief nod. He used the facilities and had a quick shower, mindful of the time limit. He managed to wash his hair, soap and rinse his body haphazardly. He stepped out and wrapped a towel around himself, grateful when he walked out and Sirius was immediately there to help him over to the bed. Sirius had gotten a clean pair of pajamas ready for him and it looked like the bed had been changed. Sirius ducked momentarily into the bathroom to set it to rights and gave him some privacy to change. Harry pulled on the pajamas and climbed back under the fresh duvet with a sigh. Sirius called Dobby and a tray appeared for Harry, chicken broth with dumplings, a glass of milk and a slice of chocolate cake. Another tray appeared for Sirius, who glared at the milk. Harry hid a smile and tucked into his dinner. He had demolished the broth and was just starting the chocolate cake when Sirius cleared his throat. So how much did you hear? Sirius asked. All of it, pretty much, Harry said, honestly. Did you really almost incinerate Professor Dumbledore? I got mad and the house magic reacted, Sirius admitted just as honestly. But we worked it out, and as you heard, he's keen to apologize to you. He held Harry's gaze. I really do believe he didn't know how bad it was for you there. He was quite upset when I explained. Harry nodded slowly and took advantage of eating his cake to avoid responding. He wasn't certain what he felt about an apology and forgiving the headmaster anymore. You all right? Probed Sirius gently. Just. Harry poked his cake. I guess I was thinking about whether I wanted to forgive Professor Dumbledore. Sirius raised an eyebrow. Oh. Harry took a deep breath and met Sirius's eyes. I was thinking I wanted to forgive him because I wanted him to still like me, but that's stupid, isn't it? I should hear his apology and then forgive him if I think he means it. Well, I wouldn't say it was stupid so much as human, Sirius said gently. Everybody wants to be liked and nobody really likes confrontations or rejection. But you're right in that if somebody has wronged you, you should forgive them only if they are genuinely sorry, not for any other reason, and if they are a true friend then they'll be genuinely sorry. Harry nodded. Will you arrange something with Professor Dumbledore then? Sirius nodded. For next week. And you're okay with me giving him a second chance? Harry checked, remembering Sirius's words to Remus. I am, and I'm very proud that you've thought about your reasons for doing so, Sirius reassured him. And second chances are a good thing sometimes. Like with the Malfoys? Harry asked dryly. The Malfoys had been a topic of much discussion when they'd gone over their strategy for the family meeting. Harry had been all for treating them the same as the Lestranges. Well, that's not so much a second chance as delayed judgment. Sirius grinned. Old Lucy seems to have realized it. Some of his prominent supporters were actually quite helpful today. I still don't like it. I doubt he's genuinely sorry. Possibly not, but we need him at least until old Voldemort is gone for good. Sirius smirked mischievously. Then we'll go with the plan of dropping him and your Uncle Vernon naked in Diagon Alley with guilty tattooed all over them. Maybe we'll even handcuff them together. Harry couldn't help laughing at the mental image. Can I just say you? A yawn took him by surprise, and a moment later he was divested of his tray and encouraged to snuggle back down under his duvet. Are you staying with me? Harry asked sleepily as Sirius retook his seat. Where else would I go? Sirius remarked with a smile. Go to sleep, Pronglet. Harry smiled back, had a momentary thought that it was nice to have Sirius, someone who cared about him, because Aunt Petunia would never have stayed, and in the next instant was fast asleep.